Thank you for listening to the Isn't That Legal podcast, a legal podcast for non-lawyers. I'm Steve Flores, and I'm a lawyer, and I know my stuff, but there are a lot of different areas of the law that I'm unfamiliar with. So on this podcast, we bring in lawyers from different areas to come in and talk about what they do in a way that's easy to understand. One thing that's important for all of us to remember is that laws change all the time, and that we elect the people that write those laws. So if there's something that's unfair or doesn't make sense to you, you should organize, get together with like-minded people, vote, and make sure that you hold your legislators accountable. Before we get started, it's important for you to understand that we're going to be talking about the law and how lawyers work, but we're doing it for entertainment purposes. We are not providing legal advice, and you should not rely on the discussions we have for legal advice. If you have a legal problem, it's really important for you to hire a lawyer to help you with that. On this episode of Isn't That Legal podcast, we're going to be talking about criminal law from a criminal defense attorney's perspective. Okay, so my guest today is my good friend Martin Quintana, who is a founder and the managing partner of Quintana Law Group, LLC. He focuses his practice on state and federal criminal defense, along with a few other different areas of law. Martin, welcome.
Hi, Steve.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, about how long you've been practicing and why you became a lawyer, maybe?
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me on the show. I'm very excited because, as you know, when we get together and talk shop or lack of, it always is a good time, right?
Absolutely.
So first of all, I'd like to just say, at this point in my career, where right now, due to the coronavirus, it almost feels like we're not practicing law as much, right?
Right.
Because we're at home and trying to protect our loved ones. So with that said, it almost makes me forget, like, for example, when I got in a suit and tie today, how to tie one. Because it's not as often anymore as we're doing that.
Right,
so,
right. We're all having to adjust.
Yeah, it's quite an adjustment, but I'm sure we'll get into something like that, right? So with that said, I've been practicing law for quite a while now. We're almost going on almost 20 years, and it's been an interesting ride, to say the least. As far as when, I remember I was driving here this morning, and I remember the first time I stepped into a courtroom. That was around 1996 when I started an internship with a very infamous attorney, infamous criminal defense lawyer from Chicago. And that's when I got my first opportunity to do an internship.
Okay.
And man, let me tell you, if you know anything about 26th California, that is definitely the place to learn the ropes. Because
Okay. So that's a big courthouse here in Chicago. I think it's the largest in the country. Is that?
It is.
Right? Yeah.
It is. And so there's a lot of famous cases have come out of that area. One of them, quite frankly, right now, I think in the news is R. Kelly. He's got a big case going on. But
I think Jesse Smollett, too, right, is happening down there as well. Yeah.
Correct, as well. So it's always fun to remember back where you came from.
Yeah.
You know, we're in 2020, and I'm talking about 1996 to you. So that probably shows you my age.
Yeah, that's wild. So stepping into that courtroom, that convinced you, hey, I'm going to be a lawyer and I'm going to do criminal law?
I don't think that was the exact moment that I said I wanted to do. I think what really happened was I wanted to be, truthfully, an FBI agent. That's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to wear the suit and tie, have the gun, and solve crimes. And that's kind of what I had of a law enforcement background when I was younger. I used to be a police explorer.
Okay.
Back with Riverside, Illinois Police Department.
Okay.
And it was funny because back in the day, those were the ideas that I had. And then eventually, when I got into college, right, and then got into the end of my college career, I had to start thinking, what am I going to do here?
Yeah.
And that's when I decided to major in political science as well, other than criminal justice.
Yeah, that was my undergrad major
Right.
too. Yeah.
And so then at that point, I met this gentleman who I started an internship with, and he's family friend, and I got an opportunity of a lifetime, to be honest with you. I was blessed, truly blessed, to have this opportunity. And sure enough, when I walked into his office, I remember at 1 East Wacker, corner of State and Wacker.
Okay.
I walked through these doors.
Downtown Chicago, yeah.
Downtown Chicago. I walked through those doors, and I remember talking to my mom and dad right before I went in through these doors. And I said, Mom, Dad, when I walk through these doors, there's no turning back. And by the way, there's no more FBI agent.
Wow.
It's going to go down a different road. And they said, wow. Well, son, or as my mom would say, mijo, make us proud. And I said, I sure will. And that was it. Here we are.
So let's get into a little bit of the criminal law stuff. So
Sure.
One thing that always kind of fascinates me is, when people think a criminal defense attorney, it has a little bit of a negative connotation, I feel like.
It does?
I'm trying to be delicate. But people always say, okay, well, or at least, in my experience, there's this conception that, hey, if that person got arrested, it's because they did something. If that person got in trouble, it's because they were in a place that they shouldn't have been, right? They should have been at home or whatever. Maybe this is my parents talking, but that's kind of something that I feel a lot of people kind of think about. So how do you see that, or how do you address that kind of mentality when it comes to criminal law? That's
a good question. So it is funny how there is parts of society, if you will, or people that could be judgmental, right?
Yeah.
So the way I address it is when I have a client that comes into my office for the very first time.
Yeah.
There's no doubt in my mind that there is a part of my brain that pretty much gets desensitized from the fact of what the charge is, okay? Because I have people that literally are coming to me for all sorts of problems. I mean, everything from a state case, meaning a state of Illinois problem, versus a federal case, which could be a federal issue in federal court, right?
Yeah. So let's before you go on, so I guess let's break that down a little bit. So I guess in terms of different crimes that somebody can be prosecuted for, you've got state laws that set out different types of state crimes, I suppose. And then you've got federal laws that set out a different set, or maybe they're similar.
Correct.
And do you get charged for both at the same time, or is it?
There's ways, not to get technical, but there's ways. Like I'm thinking of a case now where one of my clients was charged via state by the state of Illinois, so a state prosecutor out of Cook County.
Okay.
And once the case was almost towards the end, then the feds, as we say, the government, the federal government, took the case.
Okay.
And at that point, they dropped the state case, and then the feds picked the state case up, if you will, and then they prosecuted my client for federal charges.
Got it.
And that was a situation that, is not that typical, I would say, but as some prosecutors from state court might say, the state prosecutors do all the work, all the investigation, looks like a nice case, and then when they're just about to maybe either go to trial or resolve the issue with negotiations, then the feds come in and say, oh, by the way, thanks for the gift. We're going to take the case over now. And it's pretty much how that case worked out, the one I'm thinking about. But not always are they going to be the same way. But I could tell you that that's a great question, because you could have a state and federal charge. But I'm going to tell you, if you get charged in federal court, I would say generally it's not good.
Yeah.
Because most of the time the feds have a very good case against you. For example, they've already listened to conversations that you've had.
Yeah.
They've had surveillance on you. They have things that eventually, if you got caught with your hand in a cookie jar, it's very possible that you might have to negotiate a deal of some sort into the future. But you can't think that way always, because that's why I tell people, back to the original question.
Yeah, sorry.
When somebody comes to my office, I have to take them and basically assume that they are innocent, because technically people are innocent until proven guilty.
Okay.
I don't care where you're at. I don't care if you're in state court, federal court. I don't care if you're in Wyoming, Chicago. It doesn't matter. Right. My point is that you have to take people at their word. But generally speaking, I'm not asking every question about what happened at that point.
Yeah.
So it's almost like in steps. Step one is what I call a general intake.
Yeah.
General intake means name, address, date of birth, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And then let's find out, so what are you charged with? What have you been charged with? We'll take something, for example, something that most of people in the audience might be able to really comprehend or understand. What's the number one thing that most people
Yes,
can
I was
be
going to ask
arrested
you,
for?
what are people getting in trouble for?
Well, right now it's a very a hot topic would be maybe domestic battery, unfortunately, because you have people that are, due to the COVID-19 virus, you have people that are literally stuck at home. I would say, so the hot topic, because you asked the question right now, is not so much, for example, driving offenses, because typically driving offenses can consist of like driving under the influence of alcohol, also known as, in the state of Illinois, a DUI, or driving while license suspended or revoked. Those are minor traffic issues, but when you're driving, for example, and an officer is running your plates behind you, and you're driving while license suspended or revoked, because you shouldn't be driving, or maybe you don't even know it, and they run your plate, now you get pulled over, right? So I'm talking, those are driving offenses. But for now, I'm simply talking about before even getting in the car, because you're not technically supposed to be driving around for nothing, right? You're supposed to go to work and home, grocery store and home.
Right.
But domestic battery issues are the ones that could be a hot topic right now.
Okay.
And those are ones that we have to take of an example. So someone comes to my office and said, well, at this point, even technically, they wouldn't be at my office, right? So we're having Zoom calls with people, or we're having conference calls where simply it's, the typical dial in and talk to me, and we're on a phone call, and there we are.
Okay.
So there's certain questions I will ask.
So just kind of thinking about in the intake, like I'm sure there's situations where you talk to somebody and you're like, there's no way I'm going to take this person on as a client. Like, can you tell us a little, like, kind of some of the things you're looking for in terms of, obviously I think ability to pay is probably one, but other things that you can tell, like, okay, this is this is not going to be a good client to work with.
Sure, that's a great question. So there are the times where we're not talking finances, right? Because financially, I always try to make it actually one of the things that we talk about, if we talk about it at the end of the conversation, because it's not in the forefront when I talk to a client. When I talk to a client, what I'm really looking for is this relationship. Okay. Do we have this relationship where I can feel like I can trust them, and I feel that they can trust me? But when I find out that they can trust me, it's because of their body language or what they say. So that at times we'll go over everything. Like, I want to know, are you married? Do you have a girlfriend? Do you have kids? Where are you from? Where were you born? I want to know things about them. Because what people don't realize, right? People, we started this off by criminal defense lawyers get bad raps, right? But what people don't realize is when you're charged or alleged to have committed a crime, the majority of cases, if not all cases, are going to end most likely in two ways. Okay. Either litigation or negotiations. I'll explain. Litigation means either we're going to go to trial on a case by way of picking a jury, which that means 12 people in the box that are going to decide my client's fate, if he's innocent or guilty. Or we're going to pick a judge who decides if my client is innocent or guilty.
So you can do either or.
Correct. So you can. So
and it's the defendant's choice?
Correct.
Okay.
The client has a right to determine if he will be judged by a judge or a jury. Okay.
What goes into that kind of that thinking?
To decide?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a lot, but we're going to sum it up. What goes into it is it's almost common sense at times.
Okay.
Think of it this way. If I have a judge, right? Because judges do have reputations. They have reputations amongst the defense bar. They have reputations amongst prosecutors. They have reputations amongst their peers.
Yeah.
So I think it really, truly matters from day one who your judge is going to be, because at that point, say some attorneys might not have a good relationship with a very specific judge.
Yeah.
So at times there's procedural rules, not to get technical, but there's procedural rules that we have a right to file what is called a motion to substitute a judge early on in a case in order to get another judge.
So say, all right, your charges are brought against your client. At that point, you know that there's this particular judge is going to be overseeing the case, or
typically one of the very first times where you're going to be going into a court case, right? Okay. Say whatever specific courthouse. Eventually, we'll say it for purposes of brevification, right? We're going to say you get a judge that you get assigned to, right?
Okay.
At that point, there's a certain deadline that ultimately you have to file a motion in order to get a substitution of judge.
Okay.
So once you have the judge that you're going to have from that day forth, for example, like in felony cases, you then have a specific time frame to file the substitution of judge.
Okay.
And I'm going to be honest with you. In my humble opinion, there better be a real good reason, in my humble opinion, to file that motion to substitute a judge.
Yeah.
Because there's two thoughts on that.
Okay.
There's certain defense attorneys that may say, I don't care. Or there's certain defense attorneys that may say, oh, they don't care.
Yeah. The judge doesn't care.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Like the judge doesn't care.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you, I think, in my humble opinion, that judges care. Because what are you saying when you file a motion to substitute a judge?
Yeah.
You're saying something might be wrong with you or with how you rule, which basically means it's something personal.
Yeah. Or I'm not, my client's not going to get a fair shake.
Sure. That's even worse. Forget about it. That's even worse.
Yeah.
So my point to you is that you better do it for a real good reason, because let's be honest, judges talk.
Yeah.
And eventually it might be an issue.
So are you entitled to that? Like, can you say, like, if I say, hey, I don't want this judge, does the judge get to decide whether or not they get replaced, or is it automatic?
No, it's gonna happen. You file that motion, you're gonna get a different judge.
Okay, I got it.
But my point to you is, as a practitioner, if you're in and out of these courthouses or in and out of these courtrooms or dealing with these judges, you before you do that, you better make sure that you really have a good reason, that it is a very good reason. And it technically should really be. Think about that for a second. It's not like to forum shop, right?
Right.
Think about it. You could use it to forum shop and say, oh, I don't like this one. Let me try another one.
Yeah.
But the point is, you better have a good reason. And truth be told, I think where we're at right now, at least in Cook County, and I practice in I practice in all counties of the state of Illinois, don't get me wrong, kind of like a hired gun, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. But at this point in Cook County, for example, I would say we have a tremendous amount of judges that at least I've had the privilege and the honor of getting to know and or having some type of assistance, if you will, on having them continue into their future or getting on the bench. Okay. And that has been a pleasure, because I feel like, for example, Steve, if you said that you wanted to run for judge, well, you and I both know that I would 100% support your candidacy, let alone to help you in any way, shape, or form I could.
Yeah, so that's kind of something interesting. I guess Illinois, I don't know that every state has elected judges, but Illinois certainly does, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Even all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Right. Well, that alone is a whole different topic of conversation of how to become a judge, right? Or how to run for judge. But.
So let me go back to, we were talking a little bit about whether, if you're going to go to trial, you decided, hey, I'm not going to take a deal. I'm going to go to trial. The next step is thinking, okay, are we going to have the judge decide this, or are we going to have a jury decide this? I'm sure there's a ton that goes into that, but can you give us kind of just a flavor of, here are the kind of key things that you would think about, or that, depending, I guess, on what your client wants to do?
Sure. I think it really boils down to what the charge is, for starters.
Okay.
right? Because let's be honest, if you know or have reason to believe that a judge has had a family member, for example, in a DUI situation, which is driving under the influence of alcohol in the state of Illinois,
Yeah.
if you have a judge that you know or have reason to believe that has lost a loved one from a drunk driver,
Yeah.
hitting that loved one and killing them, and now you're in front of them to have your client judged by them based on their background.
Yeah.
Sure, they're supposed to remain to a point where they can be able to even keel and judge your client,
Yeah.
right? And be unbiased, if you will. This is the word I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But we're human beings.
Yeah.
We're human beings. So those are things that at times I count on my relationships with all types of people in the legal system.
Yeah.
And those are the people that I reach out to in order to determine at times which judge might be appropriate for which type of case
Okay.
that I'm handling.
That makes
So
sense.
makes perfect
And what about the
sense.
jury, though? When, like, but
A jury?
is there certain crimes that you're like, hey, it's better to put that in front of a jury, or there's no way you should go in front of a jury for something like that?
I'll tell you, it depends on the severity of the crime.
Yeah.
So, say for example, you have a case where, for example, a child has been maybe sexually assaulted,
Okay.
right? And those are circumstances where at times you might have to consider, is this really for a jury or is this really for a judge to decide?
Yeah.
Because it's a very sticky situation. For example, this is also a very good way of deciding. Is it a factual case or is it a legal argument?
Yeah.
So if I have a factual case versus a legal argument, I might decide at that point to try to advise my client accordingly if I would want for him to pick a jury
Yeah.
versus to have a judge decide his fate. And the reason for that, let's be honest, is very simple. It's because in the long run, you could have a case where the facts look what they look like, and you might be able to sway the jury because they like your client or they like me or
Okay.
they like my team, and that they're going to side my way.
Okay.
Versus-
So that's not even like legal arguments. That's just kind of
all factual.
human nature almost,
Absolutely.
right? Yeah. It seems
That-
like.
that's it.
Yeah.
Factual. Those are factual arguments. Versus a legal argument is where I might need the judge to really look at the law and convince the judge that an element of the crime is missing, or one element of the crime.
So when you say element, so can you explain that a little bit? What does that mean?
Sure. Every charge has to have what is called an element or elements of the crime.
Okay.
Right. So, for example, I like to use these types of cases like that most people can understand.
Okay.
Again, driving under the influence of alcohol and impaired at the time of the arrest.
Okay.
Those are elements. So you got to prove driving is one element.
Yeah.
Under the influence of alcohol or narcotics is another element.
Okay.
While driving is another element.
Okay.
Right? So driving under the influence of alcohol and impaired is another element. So driving, the substance, right, whether it be alcohol or drugs,
Yeah.
and impaired. Now, those are elements that the state's attorney's office must prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
What is that? So what is? So I think we've all heard beyond a reasonable doubt, but what does that mean? What? How? Over 50%, 75%.
Let's just put it this way. Let's say 99.9%.
Wow.
It should be 99.9. No, well, first of all, it's the highest burden of proof that we have in the legal system.
Okay.
So there's a big difference between saying by preponderance of the evidence that some practitioners hear, which is a lighter burden, versus a standard of proof or a burden of proof is the highest. So the highest.
Preponderance is kind of, if you put it on a scale.
More likely or less likely.
Okay, yeah, that you'll have a little bit more on one
Sure.
side. That's the preponderance, but beyond a reasonable doubt, that's 99.
99.9%.
Okay.
And some people say, oh, that's high. That's high. It is high. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But in certain cases, it's not easy, right?
Right.
In certain cases, it's not easy on me. It's not easy on the state. And it could go both ways.
Yeah.
So one prime example is when somebody is driving, say that they've had a couple of drinks, alcohol to be exact, and they leave a bar and they're heading home. Let's be honest. I said a couple, right? In my hypothetical, I'm saying a couple.
Yeah.
So a couple of drinks, they're heading home, and they get pulled over. Let's say because they were speeding. Okay. And let's not even say 20, 25 miles per hour. Let's say 11 miles per hour over the limit. Okay. 11. So now, at that point, in this hypothetical, you should be thinking, hey, man, that might have been me last week, right? Couple drinks, meaning 2. 11 miles per hour over the limit. You're trying to get home because it's almost 10 o'clock and you want to put the kids to bed, right?
Yeah.
Well, when Johnny Law comes up to your car and he's about to say to you, good evening, sir, and he's going to start asking you different questions, right? Yeah. Where are you coming from, right? What have you been doing tonight, right? What I'm trying to tell you is if we fast forward in this hypothetical, the level of impairment is what I'm going to strike into that case. I'm going to hone on impairment because what have we seen thus far in my hypothetical? Is he guilty of a DUI because he was speeding?
Oh, he was driving. He was drinking.
Sure.
But then I guess the element of impairment.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's where I would strike. That's where I would focus on would be the impairment. And now the question is, would I want a judge or a jury to decide that case? Yeah. And that's hypothetical I'm giving you. Most likely than not, I'm going with a judge because a judge knows the difference between what we consider as reckless behavior, right? Yeah. Reckless driving, erratic driving, right? We're talking about 11 miles per hour over the limit. Yeah. And that's it. So no bad driving whatsoever at this point in time in my hypothetical, and I'm gonna beat that case. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm jumping to conclusions because guess what else the officer can have him do? What? He can have him blow a breathalyzer.
That's right.
Right? Yeah. In the state of Illinois, and if not all states, you can be asked to blow a breathalyzer, and if you blow a breathalyzer, let alone for sure over .08, you're going to get arrested. Yeah. Either way, you might get arrested anyway, even if you refuse the breathalyzer, right? Yeah. Yeah. So now it goes into a different argument, which is, what do you do?
Right. Right.
And that's why we're here.
Okay. So one of the things, I guess, kind of similar to that is this idea of, and I suppose it makes a difference whether or not you're arrested, but if you're arrested, whether you should talk to the police or whether are there situations where you should talk to or you always say like, no, I'm not going to say anything. I need a lawyer. And I suppose it makes a difference. Yeah, like I said, whether somebody's arrested or not. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So on the back of my business card, it says basically people's rights, right? Yeah. And it really does say, according to what there's these things called Miranda Rights. Yeah. I'm sure if people have watched any type of police officer
TV show,
right? Yeah. You have the right to remain silent. Right. Right? So let's talk about that. Okay. You do have the right to remain silent. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. You have a right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one may be provided for you. And then they'll say, do you understand your rights? Do you waive your rights? Do you want to talk to me? Right? Yeah. That could, in my opinion, that could be difficult if all these things are going on around you and an officer's asking you that, right? Yeah. So rather than really think about all of this, truthfully, what I tell at least my clients is if you can't pull out my card, because my card basically says on the back of it what to do. Yeah. And it literally says what to tell the officer. So when you're dealing with law enforcement, in my humble opinion, unless you are completely innocent, like, for example, in a driving under the influence of alcohol case, right, where you haven't been drinking, you have no narcotics in your system, your car has nothing in it that's illegal, you literally are doing nothing wrong, except in my hypothetical, speeding 11 miles per hour the limit. Yeah. Well, let's be honest. There's no reason for you to start getting argumentative. I'm not talking to you, officer.
Right.
I'm not. I mean, there's a way of just being common courtesy, man. Right.
Right.
My father used to tell me, treat people how you like to be treated. A level of respect, right?
Right.
So in that situation, there's no need for you to if the officer comes up to you and says, hey, do you know why I pulled you over? Sure, I was speeding 11 miles per hour over the limit. Well, first of all, that's an admission of guilt.
Yeah.
So that's going to go in his report.
Yeah.
And you already admitted to committing the crime. So now, yeah, you're going to probably get a ticket, and then you're going to be at court, and that's it. That's a minor issue.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about something where a police officer comes to your house. Let's talk about when a police officer does pull you over for something that you might not be doing that is proper, right?
Okay.
The best advice always is, officer, with all due respect, I know you have a job to do. I understand. But I would like to remain silent. And I would not like to answer any questions unless they're, typical information. But your driver's license, as long as it matches your address where you live,
Yeah.
that's more than enough information to have you provide the officer. So technically, what real question do you really need to answer at that point?
Yeah.
There is none.
Yeah.
Because he's going to ask you the who, what, when, where, how, and why. He has a right to ask you.
Right.
But the reality of it is you also have a right not to answer it.
Right.
So
And you could do it respectfully so that you're
Absolutely.
not escalating a situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No question. So those are things that I tell people you should really exercise your right to remain silent.
Yeah.
And then at that point, lawyer up. Say, officer, I have a lawyer. And actually, I have his business card right here. If you want to question me,
Yeah.
if you don't mind me calling Martin Quintana, you can call him right here. Here's his number. And I'm sure he'd be more than happy to set up a meeting.
So what if you don't have a lawyer?
If you don't have a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
well, you just say, listen, I want a lawyer.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you 9 out of 10 times, they're going to respect the fact that you wanted to remain silent. And they're also going to respect the fact, because they better, legally speaking, that you lawyered up.
Yeah.
So remain silent, lawyer up, and call me.
So, sometimes I suppose, I guess if you don't have the means, you can get a, I don't know how, exactly how you get there, but, a public defense attorney or public defender.
Sure.
I mean, are there situations where, even if you don't have the means, that you're better off hiring your own attorney as opposed to having a public defender or something like that?
Sure. So that's an interesting situation to. It's an interesting question, because I know public defenders that are really good lawyers.
Yeah.
And it kind of, it does bother me at times where I hear different types of clients that will say something like, "Oh, I want a real lawyer. I want a private lawyer. I want a real lawyer." And I don't subscribe to that. I think that that's rude, in my opinion, because there's some really great public defenders that are out there that are really doing justice for clients, no different than I am, right? So, but I would say, if at this point in someone's life, if they feel that they would like to talk to somebody who in reality has a certain number of cases that they handle throughout the year. Unfortunately, some of these public defenders are very overwhelmed at times with the amount of work that they have.
Yeah.
And I commend them for typically doing the best they can. And truth be told, at times, I'm sure that there's a rate of burnout where, they're overworked.
Yeah.
Right. And underpaid. Right.
Yeah, I think that's an issue across the country. Right?
Yeah. And I have a lot of respect for public defenders, because I always try to make sure that at least I have a good rapport with them. Because let's be honest, typically they are the people that are in those rooms more than I am.
Yeah.
And when people are in the rooms more than I am, because they practically live there, they are also very good at providing insight to a judge's last ruling, or a judge's last couple rulings, or how a prosecutor is looking this week versus last month, or how things are working. What's the temperature of the water when we put our finger in it? What am I walking into? See, so those are things that, for my clients, are extremely important for me to always have that demeanor of the person they're hiring me to have all those thoughts in mind, right?
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
what I explain to clients too. I explain to them that when you're hiring a lawyer, whether you want to hire myself or someone else, don't just hire them alone with the reputation that someone said, oh, this is a great lawyer.
Yeah.
Because if someone says this is a great lawyer, I hope someone follows up with why.
Yeah.
Why are they a great lawyer?
Yeah.
Tell me.
So let me ask you this.
Sure.
This kind of leads into what I was thinking too. So let's say you are in Texas or California, and not that you would do anything wrong ever, but say you get yourself in trouble. How are you? You need to get yourself a lawyer right away. What are you looking for? Well, what are the questions you're going to ask, or their background that you're going to be looking for, so that you're getting a good lawyer to help you with your issue.
Sure. So I think there's definitely something to be said about somebody who, in my humble opinion, as far as an attorney's concerned, is born and raised in Chicago. I think,
but you're in Texas, I'm telling you.
No. Well, here's my analogy.
Okay.
No different than if I'm in Houston, Texas.
I see.
Right?
Yeah.
Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah.
Las Vegas, Nevada, right? To me, I want to know, if I'm picking a lawyer, I want to know who they know.
Yeah.
I want to know where they're from. I want to know more about them, not just from what, let's say, their website says.
Right.
Right? So I think that in the long run, when you're picking an attorney, there is something to be said about the who, the what, the where, the why, and the hows of these attorneys.
So that's a conversation you have with the lawyer.
Absolutely.
That's like, okay, give me some questions that folks may be able to ask.
I'll give you a couple. I mean, the fact that where someone went to law school these days, once you're out, how many years at that point practicing law, forget about where you went. The real question is the specific type of charge that I would be charged with. I would like to know, how many cases of this type have you handled, let alone in the last 3 years of your practice?
Yeah, that makes.
I mean, I could say a year.
That's probably question number one, right?
Yeah. How familiar are you with this very specific case? Mm-hmm. Did you handle one yesterday? Did you handle one 5 years ago? Did you handle one 10 years ago? I mean, that to me is important. Let me tell you why.
Yeah.
Because the laws change. Laws are changing all the time.
Right.
And if you're not on top of the most recent case law that is coming out on the topic or issue in regards to your charges, well, then you might have somebody who not necessarily is what we call a litigator.
Yeah.
Because a litigator is going to be on top of the changing laws day to day, so that ultimately when you're going to dissect that criminal case, you're going to dissect it in a fashion where you might have loopholes that have been created so that you can utilize those loopholes and obviously try and litigate the case.
Yeah, and that's, that is through experience, basically, right?
That's
it.
it.
I mean, we talked a little bit about, there being like a million different areas of law. I guess even within, a particular area, right, there's still people that, just have more experience doing a particular kind of issue.
Sure.
So that makes a lot of sense. So that seems like to be the number one question. If you're looking for a criminal defense lawyer, it's how many times have you done
Right.
this?
I mean, I would say that's important, right? Yeah. And I mean, truth be told, I mean, there's certain people that have been a prosecutor, right? So they've been a prosecutor for whatever number of years, and they went through those ranks, if you will. Some attorneys were public defenders for whatever number of years. Some weren't a prosecutor or a public defender.
Yeah.
They immediately started off in the private sector so that they have that type of experience as well.
Okay.
So you have all, basically those are the three types of individuals. You're either in some type of government job, right? Mm-hmm. So we'll call it a government employee versus going to the private sector, right?
Right.
And that's very important as well.
Okay. One thing that we've kind of heard, and I don't know if you've kind of dealt with this, but is folks and their rights with respect to their phones, for example. When they can be forced to kind of unlock their phones, whether their thumbprint can be used to unlock the phones or their face against their will. Have you dealt with any of that, or have you seen any of that?
I haven't seen anything lately that deals with something, because you mentioned the word forced,
Yeah.
right? So have I seen it where you have subpoenas or search warrants, I should say,
Okay.
that the government utilizes to get to a phone?
Yeah.
Which is a great question, because I have a case that right now I'm dealing with where a phone is literally at the point of make or break this case,
Okay.
right? And not to get into specifics, because I can't, of course, of the
Yeah.
details of any pending case, but let me put it to you this way. Imagine for a second that you were alleged to have committed a crime today. And I have to assume that today you came from your home, you drove here, and you exited your vehicle after parking, and you came into this building, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you have your cell phone on you, right? Right? Okay. So
Right.
imagine that you, about 30 minutes ago,
Yeah.
you were alleged to have committed a crime.
Okay.
Now, we know you're here, right?
Right.
But the police don't know that at this point. So they arrest you and they ask for a search warrant of your phone.
Okay.
So phones these days, what people don't realize is there's been like a logical argument that they're almost like loaded guns when you give them to kids too young.
Yeah.
Okay, let's be honest, because here's the point. In my hypothetical, where you're coming from your home to this location, we're going to want to have that phone, at least my private investigator is going to want to what is called scrub your phone
Yeah.
in order to determine where and what towers, while you were driving from point A to point B, picked up your phone so that eventually we could have proof that you were not at a location at a certain time
Interesting.
because of your phone hitting different towers. That I'm not saying proves beyond a reasonable doubt, but at least it begins an alibi
Yeah.
defense where you weren't at a specific location, or at least your phone wasn't.
Yeah. So that's almost the flip side. That's kind of a way to at least demonstrate that you're.
Defend the case.
Yeah, to
right.
defend the case.
Defend
Right,
the
right,
case. Now, don't get me wrong. The opposite argument about that is where a cell phone can be utilized completely as a sword against you, right?
Right.
So the argument is you can use it as a sword or a shield.
Yeah.
And that's where what we're talking about, which is unfortunately for a lot of my clients at times, their cell phones could be used as a weapon against them because there's information in there that if it's received or gotten by the government, it could be a bad situation. So,
But it sounds like you would expect there to be some kind of search warrant or something that would be approved by a judge in order for
Sure.
somebody to search your phone.
Sure. Generally speaking, I mean, you're dealing with people that, of course, know procedural issues, because obviously if something's not done properly, we have motions as defense attorneys that we could file to preclude information or evidence coming into a case.
Okay. So
And
something, I guess your normal, I'm sure I'm saying this wrong, but the kind of search and seizure where, you have to go through I guess the officers or the state has to go through the proper process in order to search your home, for example.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, that goes back to their powers that they have to be able to have search warrants that are issued, signed by a judge. And all those things are things that, at least in my office, we have checklists. So when we have a case that has a search warrant, we have a checklist of things that we have to check off.
Okay.
When we deal with whether it be a house or a vehicle or a person, same thing. There's checklists. And these are things that you develop as the years go on, where you see different cases, and then you can catch something. So where something wasn't signed properly, or there's a specific deadline or a time frame that wasn't utilized properly by law enforcement, let alone the government, such as the prosecutors. I mean, most of the time though, it's literally a prosecutor getting handed evidence, just like I'm getting handed evidence, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it all depends on the police work that's being done properly and following the rules and practice. So.
Okay. Okay. So I guess one other question that we've kind of that I've heard is this idea of and maybe this is kind of outside of the kind of what we're talking about, but in terms of a person's right to defend themselves within their home. There's concern. Okay, if somebody's trying to break into my house and I shoot them, maybe I'll get in trouble for that, or I'll be prosecuted for that. Certainly, we see on the on the news all the time that these types of things are happening, and I know that this whole coronavirus thing has led to a lot of people kind of arming themselves, and kind of that's been a big
Really
of discussion point. Yeah. So, any thoughts on? I mean, any thoughts on that specific kind of?
I would say from a personal view.
Yeah. Well, personal or
Well, here's the thing. I would
lawyer.
say if somebody at this point, due to the pandemic, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did hear, by the way, that gun sales skyrocketed.
Right.
At one point, locations were almost completely out. Right. And then as far as ammo, even ammo was being, you only had so much of ammo you could buy.
Yeah.
Right. So it's interesting because the real question is, well, why were people buying all these guns? Right. And at one point or another, you got to think to yourself, when this whole thing started with the whole COVID-19, when it began, there was a level of fear, which I think there still is, but it's not. I don't know. I would say, based on my drive here, it doesn't seem like that level of fear is completely as high as it was.
We're getting used to it, I think.
I think we're getting used to it. So what my thought is, when we first started, I remember basically having conversations with different friends and family members who, I had thought they would never buy a gun. And they were one of the first people that went out and bought one and stocked up. Mm-hmm. And, the thought was, why?
Yeah.
And then, of course, the answer to that was fear. So what is it? You fear that somebody's going to break into your home and do what at the end of the day? Which I would say to you that most of those people that might want to break into your home are probably not looking to break in to really harm you or your family member. Because now you're talking about a whole different level of crime.
Right.
Versus maybe a crime of opportunity where, let's say, they want what? Your steaks? They want what? Your TV set so they can sell it? Yeah. So it's really it's probably more of a crime of opportunity, I would say, so that some of these homes, if you look at them, they're not getting hit from 10 p.m. till 8 in the morning, right? They're not getting hit at that point because most of these guys know people are home, people are sleeping. Yeah. Now, an interesting thing is, what about during the day? Well, if you know or have reason to believe that a household is empty because people are working, well, that's a perfect opportunity, right? Right. But the thought is, well, why the gun then, right? Well, I think it's just the fear of people ultimately thinking that if somebody does come in and potentially armed with some type of weapon, whether it be a knife or a gun or a pipe or whatever, at that point, unfortunately, they might be met with would be a 9, because at that point, I think it might go down, if you will. Yeah. But other than that, I mean, I would hope that maybe as some of my friends say, that's why you get a shotgun, because the moment you hear, that's where you go, uh-oh, wrong house, goodbye. Yeah. So
yeah. So let's go back. Maybe we can circle back a little bit. Have you ever had to fire clients? Can you tell us why?
Sure.
Yeah, I know earlier you were saying, kind of one of the first things you look for is to build that trust and to make sure that a person trusts you. I assume that's because you want them to follow your advice, right? Obviously, we can't force people to do anything. We can only provide advice and say, here's here's how I think, is probably the best route, but people ultimately make their own choices.
Well, there's a that's an interesting question, because there's a thought of when is it the right time where you should fire a client, right?
Yeah.
And people think that because I advise a client to maybe take a trial. I'm sorry, not take a trial. Allow me to negotiate a deal.
Yeah.
Where I think the cards are stacked against him.
Yeah.
But he still wants to go to trial. Interesting situation, because if, say, state's attorney's making me an offer of, let's put it this way. Let's say a state's attorney's offering me 2 years probation.
Right.
On a case that guy's looking at, say, 6 to 30 years in prison, right?
6 to 30?
Say 6 to 30, okay?
Okay.
So now, and I've looked at the case and reviewed it, and I've shown my client that this is where I think we don't have the best case to go to trial on.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to just tell them. I'm going to show them. I'm going to take a sticky note and say, here, read this, look at this, let's watch this video. Let me explain to you why.
Yeah.
In the long run, it's funny that that's even the client that I some lawyers might say, you know what, he's going against my advice.
Yeah.
I'm out of here, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like a feeling of loyalty to that client still, because they truly feel so wrapped up into this case that they feel that they're going to be successful. Because at this point, that makes me a little more dangerous myself, right? Because I had an opportunity to get them probation.
Yeah.
Means no jail time. In 2 years, they're off probation.
Yeah.
Granted, they'll be a convicted felon in a felony case, right? But it is what it is versus going to prison for 6 to 30 years, right?
Right.
So in that situation, I feel like, okay, look, typically I have things that a client will sign in writing so that everything's on the table. They knew that they had this on the
That you
table.
kind of say, hey, this is the deal.
Correct.
Okay.
Here's the deal.
That makes sense.
Here's all the cards. We laid them all out.
Yeah.
And in the long run, the client says, no, man, I want a trial. I want to go to trial. All right, let's do the best we can. Let's make it happen then to the best of our ability, right?
Yeah.
And that's the hardest part, because I've had clients where literally I can tell them till I'm blue in the face, hey, listen, I don't think this is a good one. This is not something that we should roll the dice and see what happens, right?
Yeah.
Versus the client that is adamant about taking a deal where I feel that this is a good case to go to trial on. See the opposite?
Yeah.
And those are, I would say to you, those are the two cases that generally you would think that I might want to withdraw from the case. But those are typically the two hypotheticals that I don't.
Okay.
It's the client that I can't get a hold of.
Yeah.
I can't find them, right? Or moves or disappears. And now I'm sitting there working on a case and I can't even find my client. So the lack of cooperation there is really more upsetting to me.
Yeah.
Because that's like, I mean, truthfully, that's one of the worst clients they have. You can't find your own client. That's a problem.
So
right?
that's a situation where you would fire somebody.
Well,
Not-
I would consider. There's like steps I like to think about. Like, for example, my clients, I always tell them, you got to be on time, right?
Yeah.
You got to be on time. If I'm not on time, it generally is not because I'm sitting there at a Starbucks drinking a cup of coffee in a drive-thru and saying, oh, forget him, I don't have to be on time.
Yeah.
Generally, I'm on time, but there's times where I have to be at another courthouse and I got to be one place and I got to be at another at the same time.
Yeah.
So and lawyers and judges and such, we all know that happens, especially when you're a private practitioner,
Right.
and you got to jump from one county to another because you have a conflict in your schedule and there's no way around it, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and typically in my situation, if you hire me, generally you want to see me come to court. You don't want to see anybody else come to court, which is typically a problem with this type of practice. So at this point, moving forward, that's really one thing I'm looking for is I'm looking for like a mini-me so that I could ultimately do the same thing that I got done as to me, which was got trained in a way that learned the ropes, and then eventually you can have somebody that can run around with you so you can be in two places at the same time.
Right.
Right.
No, I mean, that's invaluable, right? To have people that you trust that can do
Sure,
a good job under your leadership. Have you had a situation where you absolutely, in your heart of hearts, knew that somebody was innocent and they got convicted anyway? I mean, how do you deal with that?
Innocent and got convicted anyway. Wow. I don't think that I've had a case where you're saying I thought that they were innocent.
Yes.
Okay. So let me step back.
Yeah.
What I think, people don't realize this, is so irrelevant.
Yeah.
Right? So that's how it's easy when someone comes in my office and they say to me, "Do you think I'm guilty? Do you think I'm innocent?"
Mm-hmm.
I tell them, I am not a judge yet at this point in my career or a jury, right?
Yeah.
I am not that person. So don't worry about what I think, because what I think is irrelevant.
Yeah.
What the state can prove beyond a reasonable doubt is more important to me than anything else. So when it comes to your question, have I ever had somebody who I thought in my hearts of hearts was innocent and they went to prison?
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, Steve, I haven't had that happen yet.
Okay.
I haven't had that happen.
Okay. So it sounds like you kind of come in and you're like, all right, a technician, and here we've got this problem. Here's how we're going to address the problem. Not necessarily, I guess, speculating or kind of, I don't know, guessing or assuming.
You use the word technician.
Yeah.
I use the word surgeon.
Yeah.
You have to be almost like a surgeon to dissect what it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, as doctors, when you're doing a surgery, I mean, you got to be on your game, because one false move and now you're getting sued by a lawyer like me for malpractice, right? Yeah. So it's no different in the arena of being in a courtroom, let alone having a client who in reality is depending on you, and their life is in your hands. Yeah. So make no mistakes about it. It's not generally I'm thinking about whether or not they're innocent or guilty. I mean, let's be honest. When I review discovery, that discovery means police reports and evidence that the state's attorney's office gives me to review with my client. Yeah. Eventually, when you review that stuff, right, you're looking at it, and first of all, let's be honest. You see a video that you're watching, and your client is stating, yes, I killed her. Yes, I used a gun that I purchased a week ago. Yes, that's a statement on video by the police, and if done properly by police, that video, if that comes into evidence, where am I going? Yeah. What am I going to do with that? So most of the time, that's where you're getting your client to come in to, obviously, the office, and you say, okay, hey, listen, make sure you bring popcorn, because we're going to watch a movie today, and you're the star of the show. So we turn on, we press play, and there he is. And let me be honest with you, there's times where I've had clients, they get uncomfortable, and they say, you know what, turn it off. I don't want to watch it. I know what I did. I know what I said. I don't want to watch it. Just turn it off. And I go, no problem. Let's turn it off. So now,
but they know that, hey, these are the facts, right?
That's correct.
This is what's gonna be
correct.
presented. Yeah.
That's correct. Now, those are the cases, though. Yeah. That there's times where a client comes to me, and I love to hear this. You know, you're the third lawyer I've interviewed, or you're the fourth lawyer I've interviewed, or whatever, right? Seldomly, but let's say that I'm the third or whatever, and I like that, because I like them to maybe talk to somebody else who eventually they didn't hit it off with them, or maybe something that I'm saying or doing in front of them, they find to be something that immediately I get a response of, you know what, I'm done. I'm hiring you. I want you. Yeah. What's this going to cost me? Yeah. Right? And that's great, because at the end of the day, we can move forward and get past this whole, are you interviewing me? Am I interviewing you? What are we doing here? Yeah. We can get past that, and then at that point we can move on to, well, okay, let's talk about finances, right? How are we gonna get through this? Right. And generally, let's say if a fee's a higher fee than they expected, because let's be honest, when I tell you 3 to 4 lawyers, they've already got 3 or 4 quotes. Right. And I always tell them, listen, forgive me that I don't care what anyone's quoted you, right? I don't even want you to tell me. Here's my fees. Here's what I charge. is this something that you feel that is something that you can afford to move forward?
Yeah.
And they say, well, can you do better? Famous question, right?
Yeah.
And I always tell them, I don't negotiate my efforts, so I don't negotiate my fees.
Yeah.
However, what I will offer you is a payment plan of some sort that maybe we can come to a meeting of the minds, if you will,
Yeah.
so that we can put that on paper. And as long as you follow that, I will follow what I got to do.
Yeah.
And that's typically the way I work. And honestly, I haven't had any real problem. Maybe one or two clients here and there that, fall behind. And then eventually I say, listen, you got to get to this point, because otherwise I'm going to withdraw on that case. And then, eventually they come up with it somehow and we move forward. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, that's certainly something that people struggle with, or at least they don't necessarily understand, like, oh, this person is charging me for driving 10 minutes or driving to the courthouse. But, time is money, right? For what we do a lot of times. So
yeah. Nowadays, and plus with a private investigator that I like to utilize at this point, he's not cheap either, right? And sometimes, think about it, you got my eyes, but then you got a private investigator's eyes who's had years and years of law enforcement, years and years of federal background.
Yeah.
And now we run the facts by him, and sometimes he comes up with something that I might not have thought about, because it's not maybe a legal argument. It's a procedural police argument, if you will. And we take my private investigator's information and we put it together, and now we might have a defense that, truth be told, if that client, because I don't pay for the private investigator, obviously that comes from my client.
Right.
My client pays for that, right?
Right.
I'm hiring him for my client.
Right.
But when say I tell a client, I haven't had a client yet that says, oh, I don't want to spend any money on your private investigator in order to do a general investigation or analysis on my case. I haven't had a client yet, because truthfully, at least my guy is amazing, that to the point where he comes up with things that I'm just like, wow, I love it, right?
Yeah.
And it helps. It helps. Generally does help.
Yeah, I know that experience and expertise.
Oh, yeah.
So, Martin, as we're kind of wrapping up, can you kind of, just for our audience here, kind of just give them the best advice that you can think of, or that comes to mind, in the area of criminal law, if they're ever in trouble or loved ones in trouble? Can you kind of give us some general thoughts on that?
Sure. So I would say, regardless of what state you live in, regardless, if you live in the United States of America, you should always have an attorney, at least if you're dealing with, from a criminal law perspective, let alone a lawyer, right? Like your go-to lawyer.
Yeah.
So I would say, if you have somebody that you can know, like, and trust on your speed dial, that is something that everyone should have.
Yeah.
Now, there's two types of lawyers in that circumstance that I'm describing. The one is the lawyer that does a couple areas of law, but has multiple contacts and connections that he or she can utilize for your benefit.
Right.
So, for example, as myself, I'm blessed to know a number of colleagues like yourself, Steve, and others that we have around us, that we have some great lawyers that we know.
Right.
So that if I am a go-to lawyer for most of my friends and family members, I get calls all the time about something that is unrelated to what I do.
Yeah.
But I still take my time to connect my people to my colleagues and make sure that they are getting connected to the proper party in order to handle that specific case.
Right.
Okay, so that to me is important, which what I'm saying is, find yourself a go-to lawyer that you can count on for anything that ever happens, legally speaking.
And even if they themselves cannot help you, they
Correct.
know, or at least can know the person that knows.
Absolutely.
Who might be able to
Absolutely.
give you a hand.
That is what I would say is like one of the best pieces of advice that I could give to somebody. Now, when it comes to criminal law, right? If you have somebody, because I think my father used to say to me, son, you always need to know a good mechanic. You always need to know a good dentist. You always need to know a good doctor. And truth be told, people say, oh, that's old school. because now you can Google, right?
Right.
Okay. Let's be honest. Google is wonderful, right? If you want to find the latest recipe, you got tons of recipes, right?
Yeah.
But when you're looking for a lawyer, wouldn't you like to have somebody recommend you to somebody that ultimately they've pounded salt with, if you will,
Yeah.
or they know, like, and trust for years? I mean,
Right.
there's a big difference. I
Right.
mean, you generally, unless you want to do this blind date stuff, right, versus knowing somebody that you're going to marry and spend the rest of your life with, those are the type of clients that I look for myself.
Yeah.
So that when I look for a client and I interview them, I want to make sure that they feel 100% comfortable with me being their go-to lawyer, so they can go to me for everything and anything, legally speaking, that ever happens to them.
Yeah.
And that's really what's happening at this point in my career, which I'm very blessed, and thank you for those people out there in the audience that have always counted on me for anything that they ever needed legally. Thank you. I appreciate it, because that vote of confidence is exactly why I get up every morning. It's my why.
This kind of brings us to a close. Thank you to our listeners. Thank you, Jody, for the production. Martin, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. If some of our listeners want to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. Steve, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Jody, thank you. Pleasure to be with you guys on this lovely day. If people do want to have an opportunity to speak to myself or my team, they're more than welcome to reach out to us at 312-233-8313. Again, 312-233-8313. And we can also be reached via website at qlglaw.info. Again, qlglaw.info, which stands for, of course, Quintana Law Group.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Martin.
Appreciate it. Thanks again, Steve.
Thank you for listening to the Isn't That Legal podcast. Please be sure to follow us or subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, or anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. If you have any questions or areas of the law that you would like us to explore, you can email us at itlpodcast@outlook.com. Remember, laws can change. If there's something that you think is unfair, you should do something about it. Thanks again for listening.